This is your Pain Game podcast, where we talk about the game of living in and with chronic pain and trauma, getting to the heart of how to heal. I am your host, Lyndsay Soprano. On the show, I plan on discussing with doctors, chronic pain patients, holistic practitioners, loved ones, and anybody that is interested in having their voice heard in the chronic pain and trauma world that we live in. So our brain is such a magical, complicated, and challenging place to navigate and to understand. And I have talked and will continue to talk about how powerful our brains are. I mean, I have days that I feel like my brain is just broken, like just eggshell broken. And I recently have a new issue that has kind of popped up that I literally feel like my brain is shaking or dancing in my skull, like a strong vibration, or like I have a TENS unit, like on the back of my skull and it won't turn off. And it's a strange sensation and difficult to explain how it feels. And it's progressively getting worse. And I'm fearful of what we might be missing. And in the chronic pain world, we all try to explain our symptoms to other people, right? Like my feet, for example, they feel like I'm walking on hot coals and Legos and broken glass and gravel and ice all at the same time with every step. And my whole body feels like my bone marrow is burning and I'm on fire from the inside out. And I feel like I have hot lava worms like running through the veins of my whole body. It's the craziest stuff with what I have. And I'm pooped. I'm tired of Groundhog Day. I'm tired of waking up feeling like I'm broken. And my guest today has made me feel more optimistic that there is hope for all of us that are in pain. And I've talked about the brain pain connection, and I've talked about the gobs of Western doctors that I've seen and the gobs of money that I've spent that have let me down entirely because they have been trying to put Band-Aids on symptoms, never necessarily looking at the root causes of things. And I truly believe that the root causes are in my brain and are from some of the traumas that I have been faced with since I was a little girl. And in prepping for this episode and researching and quite frankly, falling in love with him a little bit, my guest today, he talks about how our brains are chief orchestrators of all mental, physical, and emotional processes. And I love that visual as a musician, because I love the idea of harmony and an orchestra and all of these beautiful pieces that work together. So without further ado, I've got my guest here today. His name is Ben Ahrens. He is the CEO and co-founder of Reorigin, a company focused on neuroplasticity-based treatment and the incredible ability of the body to repair itself. Had me at that. And over the years, Ben's path has led him through many areas of health, including serving as a celebrity and professional athlete fitness consultant. He took on the role of EVP at Innovative Medicine in New York, which is a provider of cutting-edge health therapies. And while at Innovative Medicine, he dedicated himself to expanding education for clinical practitioners in advanced biological medicine with an emphasis on chronic illness recovery. He has been featured as a speaker. You need to check out his TED Talk, by the way, and organizer at dozens of health and alternative medicine conferences globally, as well as being a certified practitioner in bioenergetics, holistic health, and integrative nutrition. He has acquired an intimate understanding of how to support people who desire changes to their body, mind, or spirit. And I know that's all of us. And he is an avid surfer, always searching the planet for the next perfect wave. I think we all need to search for our next perfect wave, quite frankly. And his story starts with being diagnosed with chronic neurological Lyme disease and what has led him on his healing journey. And he has certainly set himself out to heal, and heal himself he did. So thanks for joining me today, Ben.
Oh, thanks, Lyndsay, so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm stoked to have you. Are you cool with talking about your journey and the story of Reorigin and its program and where you're today with your health?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's get into it.
Okay, well, I'm rolling out the red carpet for you.
All right, sounds good. So yeah, I mean, thank you very much for that very kind introduction and summary of experience. Whenever I hear that, I'm like, oh man, yeah, it's been a winding road.
It's a lot.
Yeah. But in a way, it's one of those things where only in retrospect, looking back to all of the particles come together to form a picture that actually has some semblance of making sense. But I will say, from a very young age, I was always very fascinated with how things work. My favorite book when I was 4 years old was actually a book titled The Way Things Work. I don't know if anyone remembers it from the 80s, but these woolly mammoths and little, wedges and things of explaining the mechanics of things. And I even went to school in college initially for mechanical engineering. So I was always fascinated with understanding what are the pieces that make things up and how you can take them apart and put them back together. And as you pointed out, in my mid-20s, I was already going down this road of health and wellness and understanding how the body works and studying biomechanics. But I came up against this challenge that I just could not solve with the mechanistic view. And that challenge was, as you noted, coming down with what turned out to be a case of chronic neurologic Lyme disease. It took me years to get that diagnosis, as is the case, unfortunately, with many people. But as something I know you've talked about a fair bit on this podcast, the biggest and maybe most disconcerting thing was that my perception started to really fall out of alignment with reality. My level of fatigue, my level of energy, or how much energy it might take to perform a certain task, aches and pains and weird sensations would migrate throughout the body. Sometimes it would feel like my big toe was caught in a vice, and I would look down to find that, of course, it was not actually caught in a vice, to my surprise. All of these strange things that, again, like a mechanical view didn't really give me any insight on that. And so I realized that I had to kind of go deeper into this, into understanding what is the cause behind the cause, what is actually causing these symptoms and sensations that are, apart from just being extremely unpleasant and undesired, seem to be taking a lot of energy from me. And as I talked about in the TED Talk, I even lost about 40 pounds of lean body mass during a 3-year period. I spent that time in bed or on the couch, unable to walk on most days. My brain was so thick with brain fog that I couldn't even tie my shoes or read a book or do any of these things that we normally take for granted on a day-to-day basis. What I could do, however, I will say, is listen to podcasts and audios. And this was 10 years ago now. So at this time, podcasts were not as popular as they are now, but UC Berkeley and MIT were starting to put their 1 and 200 level courses online. And I was just, with every spare neuron that I had, which wasn't too many, I was soaking up information, right? I was looking for answers. That led me up the chain from the body to the brain and to the understanding that there were 2 light bulb moments that went off for me that gave me a little bit of hope. One of them was the biological medicine perspective, which basically says that, kind of unlike Western medicine, which we think of as like, okay, the doctor does the healing. You go to the doctor, they give you a medicine or a treatment or something, and that does the healing. In Europe, the biological medicine kind of modality says that healing comes from within. The body has the innate capacity to heal. And to me, this makes a lot of sense, because if anyone's gotten a cut or a bruise or a paper cut and that thing is now gone, well, that's nothing that you did or did that. The body just heals itself. So they're essentially saying that the body has this innate capacity to organize itself, for all the cells and organs and systems to play in harmony, to play nice together. And that harmony, or playing nice, is what we know as homeostasis, and results in this feeling of ease and relaxation and innate healing of the body. So that was one aha. I was like, okay, well, so let's assume that that's true for a moment. The body has the capacity and the mind to balance its neurochemistry and its chemical properties that contribute to how we feel and think. Like, let's say, okay, it's true that there's something going on here where the body can self-balance. Well, let me put that on hold for a sec, because it doesn't answer, okay, if the body is self-healing, then why am I still sick? Why am I so stuck?
Why do I feel like crap every minute of my life?
Yeah. I once heard a quote, if the kingdom of heaven is within, then why do I feel like hell?
Oh, right? My gosh, I love that.
Right?
That is really good.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, this makes sense. Maybe this could be one side of the coin, but there's more to the story. So I kept going up the chain, and that led me to the brain. And here I started to understand that, okay, the brain is, like you noted, the chief orchestrator, or like the conductor of the orchestra. And if that conductor is on point, then yes, the body can heal itself. But if the conductor is off, right? If the conductor is playing to the wrong rhythm or misfiring or not leading the orchestra in a sound way, well, then that leads to essentially chaos in the system and all of these weird perceptual issues and misdirection of the body's resources. So things that would go normally toward digestion and wound healing and procreation and mood elevation are now being redirected toward immediate survival needs. So basically, this kind of gets into being stuck in fight or flight. But we can get a little bit further, into that. But basically, these two aha moments was one: okay, the body can heal itself. Doesn't mean it's always in that state, but it can heal itself. It has that ability. And the second is that the brain conducts the body. The third, I'll say, is that, this is where things get hopeful and empowering, is what I've learned, in more recent years, that you can actually be the one who conducts your brain to conduct the body. And that's what we'll get into a little bit. That kind of led me to my own healing journey and ultimately the creation of Reorigin, which, as you mentioned, is a program and community that helps teach people how to kind of reclaim their brain, to teach it effectively how to conduct that orchestra to play in harmony so that the body can resume its natural state of health and homeostasis.
Yeah, like getting your orchestra to be back on key.
Exactly.
Because it's like flat over here and sharp over here, and this one needs a tuning over here. What's going on in the tube with the tuba?
Exactly. And you see what's happening is most of the time, like when we're coming at it from a Western medical, mindset, how complicated would it be to listen to and measure every instrument or every string of every instrument and try and manually tune those? It would be incredibly complex. Yet that's what we're trying to do with different medicines and therapies and everything that tries to tune us from the outside in, tries to regulate us from the outside in. Now, this is not to say that there's never a place for those types of medicines and therapies. I certainly believe that there is.
Sure.
But if you could just kind of get the brain to send the right messages to the entire system, as the entire collective, to self-tune, be like, okay, guys, it's time to tune up here, then harmony can emerge without so much effort.
I love that. Like I mentioned earlier, I love the visual of that because I feel out of tune. And as a singer and musician, it drives me nuts, and I used to be, hiker, biker, skier, ice skater, yoga. I mean, everything. It's so outdoorsy. And now I'm sitting in a wheelchair 50% of my life and I'm losing my mind. I mean, it rings true. And thank you for saying that there is a place for medicine, because there is. And I've said it in shows before where I'm like, I'm not saying stop your medications, people. Like, make it clear, you take your insulin, but we're used to, in the chronic pain community, and not just chronic pain, but chronic illness community, that we're used to having, well, let's have this surgery. Here's the pills to pop, talk to me in 3 months. And all it's done is cause more problems on top of more problems on top of more problems. So you were diagnosed with chronic Lyme disease. When was that? Was that in 2000? Was it 2009 that you were diagnosed? Or was that when your journey began? 2009?
2009.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so you were bedridden. Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yep. So it started off with just very strange, seemingly disconnected symptoms, right? Physical pains that would migrate, joint pains and brain fog and extreme exhaustion like I had never experienced before, that felt like it should go away with some good night's sleep and rest. And it just persisted no matter how much sleep I got. So this is what I was talking about a little bit, that separation from perception and reality. And after about 6 weeks, I started to go to some doctors who pretty well maintained you just need TLC and chicken soup. That was an actual prescription I was given,
Oh my God.
which I did. Yep. But of course, it didn't solve the problem. So I just kept going, and of course, at first we chased the symptoms. I had these crazy heart palpitations that would fluctuate whenever I changed my position. I learned that this is POTS, or postural orthostasis tachycardia. Basically means like dysautonomia, or your autonomic nervous system kind of wigs out whenever it experiences changes in temperature or posture or direction or things like that. So, you go to the cardiologist and you sleep with the halter top monitor and you do the sleep tests and all these kinds of things. And one specialist led me to the next, to the neurologist. And the more you look, the more you find. So I found issues with nerve conductivity testing, pain processing, all sorts of stuff, you name it. I went to NYU Langone, where they did brain scans and PET scans and spinal taps and EKGs and everything you could imagine. And Some things came back normal, in terms of like biochemistry, and some things came back pretty scary, showing multiple brain lesions in the frontal cortex. So I was given a diagnosis of MS, and just a lot of different scary things that still didn't explain my symptoms. I once heard this former student of mine, a kid I used to teach surfing to, said that he went to the doctor with a pain in his knee, and he was diagnosed with knee pain. He said that in all seriousness, and it kind of makes me laugh. But it's kind of the same thing, because you go and get a diagnosis of something like chronic fatigue syndrome, just means tired all the time. It's
right?
Like, well,
yeah. Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
And I have a couple girlfriends that deal with this chronic fatigue like nobody's business. And same story, different day, just like constant fatigue that you just cannot get out of.
Yeah. And so, you get these different various diagnoses that are really just descriptions of the problem. And Lyme disease was no different. That was one of many different diagnoses I received. And for many people, it's bittersweet. On the one hand, part of you is happy that you have a diagnosis. Oh, yes, I fall into a category. I understand, or there's something. Some people understand this. On the other hand, no one really knows what to do about it, let alone what's causing the various symptoms.
Sure.
So it's very much an umbrella term. And since then, there's kind of funny how every year there seems to be different labels and names for these types of conditions. Like one year it was chronic inflammatory response syndrome, and then it comes into self-perpetuating inflammatory conditions, and so on and so forth. It's like every year they kind of add another body part or brain part to the mix.
Yeah, exactly. This is type 1, this is type 2. It just goes on and on. Yeah.
But essentially at the end of the day, what I started to realize, and it came about when I was listening to a talk, or actually attending a talk at the Marion Institute in Massachusetts with Dr. Thomas Rao, who's a practitioner of European biological medicine, has a clinic there that treats a lot of Lyme and cancer patients called Paracelsus. This guy has a very all-around holistic understanding of the human body and the human being. And he noted that roughly 40% of people in the Northeast, if you pull them off the street and test them for Lyme, would exhibit Borrelia, which is the Lyme-causing bacteria. Yet out of that, far less than 2% would get what he calls Lyme disease.
Wow.
And so he makes this distinction between Lyme and Lyme disease, meaning having the bacteria that causes it versus having the actual full-blown inflammatory condition and symptomatic expression. And so that kind of started my mind thinking, like, that's really interesting. And the more I dug into that, the more it's really true. Even statistically, we know that if a cold virus, common cold, breezes through a room of 10 people, statistically speaking, about 3 of them would get sick and symptomatic, and the other 7 would remain symptom-free. So we see this over and over and over again. And the takeaway here is that ultimately there are two important sides to this coin. It's not just what's coming at us from the environment that matters. It's how and why our body responds. And what is it that determines that response? Well, in the middle is the brain. The brain is like the mediator between our external and our internal environment. And we basically have two things. There's, like in any system, there's inputs and there's outputs. And in the middle, there's the brain, which is like the mediator and the decision-making. And based on a critical decision that the brain makes, and we're talking about a subconscious decision here, and basically that decision boils down to safe or unsafe, it will put out either performance-based outputs, which are like healing and adaptation, or survival-based outputs, which are adrenaline and cortisol and inflammation, norepinephrine, and things that send us into this defensive fight or flight mode where the body allocates all of its resources toward immediate survival because the brain has determined that it's in a state of threat.
Yeah.
So sometimes we want this. We want this fight or flight mechanism. It comes from a good place. It comes from any time when we're actually in danger. We want to be able to pull all of these resources from areas of like digestion and wound healing and procreation, because those are far secondary. They're not important when it comes to immediate survival. So we take the resources from those, or the energy from those areas, and we apply it toward fight or flight, toward immediate survival, toward pumping blood and oxygen to the limbs and producing inflammation and whatever we need in order to escape the danger. Now, this is all well and good if the danger is imminent and if it's real in that way. But more often than not, what we're learning is that what can happen is the brain essentially misclassifies or misidentifies certain things, including symptoms and sensations like pains in the body, as immediately or imminently life-threatening. And based on that interpretation that the brain has learned, it will then pour out these survival outputs, which are very energetically costly and draining to the system. And so it becomes this sort of self-perpetuating condition or self-fulfilling prophecy where now, we have symptoms that are being interpreted by this region of the brain called the insula or the limbic system. They're being interpreted as dangerous. And so the body says, symptoms, we're in danger, or pain, we're in danger. It puts out more inflammation to counteract the danger, which leads to more symptoms, which leads to more danger through, responses. And round we go until acted upon by an outside force.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So I know this about my body. Every single word that just came out of your mouth, I'm like, you see me nodding, but nobody else sees me nodding. I'm like, I have a bear chasing me every single moment of my life. And I know that, like, I honestly know that. And I stopped doing doctors and medicines and pain this and pain that. I just went, I'm going baseline, baby. Like, I really want to know how my body actually feels without all of these other things that these doctors are trying to do, trying to have me take. I've made nutritional changes. I've done all of these wonderful things for my body. No drinking, no dairy, no gluten, no this, no that. Right. And so we're there. And now I'm sitting here going, I'm still in as much pain, if not more, because now the numbing that we were doing is now completely gone too. Right. So there's been things that have come up that have been really wonderful from a lot of my diet and nutrition changes. And, but I know wholeheartedly it is my brain. And so I know that a lot of people are faced with, okay, well, I want to get like a full body MRI, right? Like that's what I want to do right now in my brain. This is Lyndsay talking. I want to know what the hell is going on everywhere. But then like what you mentioned, you're like, well, then you could find out a lot of stuff that you might not necessarily know that has nothing to do with anything. And it's just kind of fine. But I don't know the brain games. Like I play brain games. I've got apps to do things to exercise my brain and little things for my feet. I mean, it's just nuts, the things that I do. And now I'm listening to what you're talking about and then looking at your program, which I know you're going to get into. I believe wholeheartedly that our brain is where we have to start. We have to start there.
Yeah. And the thing that's hard for some people, myself included, initially to get our heads around is that the brain interfaces with the body. So some people, when you first start to talk about neuroplasticity and working on things from the level of the brain, it's like, well, it's almost a double-edged sword, because it's like, well, if this actually works, then does that mean that it was all in my head to begin with, right? If there's literally something I can do in my brain training and that actually solves the problem that I perceive to be in my body, or that actually may be in your body as well, then does that undermine the advocacy work that I'm doing now?
Right. Like, am I just batshit crazy? Is that it?
Exactly. And is everyone else was right?
Everyone was right. Damn it.
Yeah. That we have to take a step back and look at a broader perspective and say that both are true. Yes, it starts and ends in the brain, meaning the brain is the thing that catalyzes, let's say, the inflammatory response. And then sensations, of course, end up back in the brain because that's where we interpret them. But in the interim, they go into the body, and inflammation and all of these things, changes in our tissue and our pH and everything happens in the body. And in my case, I had severe juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. This was visible on MRIs, bone-on-bone arthritis in the knees and hips. That was degenerative, with the result of a degenerative process in the tissue, but it was coming from perhaps misaligned signaling in the brain. So just because something's in your brain doesn't mean that it's all in your head.
Well, women love to hear that because we get treated a little bit differently, because we're all crazy or we're just women and blah, blah. We're too emotional, and we get that. I mean, it's a legit thing that we get when we go to doctors, and it's really hard for us to get through, especially strong-willed women like me. Hear me roar. I'm like, come on. Now, you had mentioned neuroplasticity. Can you talk a little bit about what that is?
Yes. So, we mentioned that the brain has this learning component, right? Where the brain can learn to overprotect the body, and it can learn that certain symptoms or sensations are, quote unquote, dangerous, even if they're not, in fact, life-threatening. So first of all, how does it learn this? Well, the brain, through neuroplasticity, is basically just the brain's ability to change for better or for worse. if it wasn't for neuroplasticity, we wouldn't be able to learn new faces or new languages or new skills or anything like that. That's merely the product of the brain reorganizing itself. And this reorganization can happen in both directions. It can learn from something in the past to protect us in the future. Because if the number one goal of the brain is survival, it wants to ensure our survival, the number two goal is efficiency. It wants to expend as little energy as possible. And it does this by learning from the past to protect us in the future. So let's say you ate something in the past that gave you a stomach ache. Now, when you encounter that same food in the future, before even eating it, maybe you might have a contraction or some sort of experience where your body is going to not really want to digest this food because of what it did last time. So it's always kind of learning in this direction. Now, fortunately, most of the time when it's learning, this is a completely subconscious process. But the same process or the same phenomenon of neuroplasticity that allows the brain to learn to protect us and sometimes overprotect is also what makes it possible for us to consciously intervene and teach the brain through repetition, through gradual exposure, to actually learn how to remain calm and reprocess or reinterpret certain symptoms and sensations as non-threatening. And when it learns to process those same symptoms or events or sensations as non-threatening, now we have this cool thing happen. Now the body can actually start to relax. We get out of fight or flight. And all of those resources that were previously, say, misdirected toward immediate survival are now available for, regenerating tissue, for healing, for even balancing brain chemistry and coming back into a state where we feel more pleasant in the present.
Ooh, I like that. Very nicely put. I would like to be pleasant in the present. All right. Hips down for sure. So with Reorigin, which is your organization, the company that you're CEO and co-founder of, you guys do something called neuroplasticity training. And can you talk a little bit about how that works and the type of, I guess, ailments, for lack of a better term, that you guys can help with in relation to neuroplasticity training? What people can see, like from, I know anxiety is one of them, chronic fatigue, etc. But can you dive into that a little bit?
Yes, sure. So primarily, people that are coming to Reorigin are struggling with invisible ailments. And so of course, when they get here, it's like, man, we really get it. I get it. I've been through it myself. So people are, I'd say, pleasantly surprised that they find themselves in an environment where no explanation is needed. Everyone is in the same boat. And most importantly, everyone is really looking to move forward and taking steps to do that. You mentioned feeling a sense of hope when you saw my TED Talk, and I'm very grateful to hear that. That was, I'll say, I almost didn't give that talk. I didn't want to go back and relive the experience, but maybe it was my higher self or saner self prevailed, and I did put it out there because I think when someone sees that it's possible, it's almost like breaking this belief barrier where it's like, okay, maybe it's possible for me too.
100%, 100%. And it's not this long drawn out thing. Most tech talks aren't really that long anyways, but it really, you made me laugh, you made me cry, and you gave me hope in a brief amount of time. So good job.
Oh, well, thank you. To answer your question though, most of the conditions that people come to us for are things like chronic pain, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, Lyme disease, and a lot of related symptoms. So dysautonomia, things we talked about like POTS and brain fog, all very common. And basically, if we were kind of just lump things into two categories, whenever it comes to just about any condition, they're usually coming from either one of two places. One of them is called peripheral pathology. It's basically a big word to mean that there's stuff happening in the body that's causing the perception, it's causing the symptoms and the pain. So example would be, you have a pain in your finger, you look down and your finger is caught in that vice. That's peripheral pathology. There's something, putting pressure on your finger, and that's what you're feeling. Those things is actually what Western medicine is great at addressing. It's great at doing x-rays and looking in the body and saying, hey, we got a problem here.
Your
Let's
arm's
go ahead and
broken.
fix it.
Yeah.
Exactly. If your arm is broken, I would not recommend neuroplasticity as your starting point. Fix the arm.
And if you think so, we've got some other places me might want to send you.
Yeah. If the pain persists, though, which it happens, right? Let's say, to continue that analogy, let's say you go to the doctor with a broken arm, you put the arm in a cast for 3 months or whatever it is, you do the physical therapy, and the pain persists. So you go back to the doctor, they re-X-ray, they're like, nope, there's nothing wrong, everything's in good alignment, but you still feel the pain. This is a common problem, and for some people, that pain worsens when they get stressed out, or if they get a cold, or if there's other issues that challenge the body as a total system. Now that pain maintains, and we even know this with people who have lost limbs. They call it phantom limb pain.
Oh yeah,
that is indicative of something that is not this first category of peripheral pathology, but this second category, what's known as central sensitization. Basically, fancy word for saying that the brain, or this part of the brain called the limbic system, responsible for receiving and interpreting these internal signals from the body, has gone a little bit haywire. It has learned to take these senses, to exaggerate them, and to perceive them as pain or burning or migrating pains or aches or all of these different things that we experience as chronic pain and chronic symptoms. So that is the category of conditions for which, unfortunately, a wide number of these conditions fall, like fibromyalgia, chronic pain, and all the rest we mentioned. But those are the conditions for which brain retraining seems to be a very viable option and is helping a lot of people.
So how can you give me an example of how does your brain get retrained? Can you give me an example of like a module or something that I would do joining Reorigin? I like the name of it, by the way, and I love your logo because I'm in marketing, so I love all of it. And it's all throughout his website.
Oh,
I do. Can you give me an example of like what would you experience for like your onboarding, like your first couple times that you would be doing, you're joining the community, you're getting engaged, you're getting involved. Can you explain what that experience is like for the end user?
Yeah. So first thing, they come right into the online community, they introduce themselves, and they start going through the online video course, which is about 7 hours, but it's broken down into 5-minute chunks. So you can just watch a couple of these 5-minute videos a day. And the first section is all about really understanding. Now, this is where, even that we haven't gotten to the brain training exercises yet, people already start to breathe that sigh of relief, because they realize that there's actual science behind it. It makes sense what they're experiencing. It's not, as we say in the program, it's not psychological, it's neurological.
Yeah, it's not woo-woo.
So we really kind of, exactly.
Yeah.
So the first phase of Reorigin is really just understanding what's actually happening in your brain and body, and how the two are connected. The second, module is really about getting into more of this area of the brain called the limbic system, and how it can lead to the perpetuation of inflammation and symptoms. And then we start to actually go through this kind of fun process of reverse engineering them. So this is where people are kind of get very engaged, and we have them map out what are called these behavioral or neurobehavioral loops. So they understand, okay, there's certain sensations that my brain is picking up on, and how does that feel in my body when I interpret those sensations? And when I have that feeling, how do I react or respond? What sort of behavior, and is there any sort of narrative that forms around that? So we start to look at the picture really holistically, and it's a very personalized process. So people take this kind of theory that they learned in the first section, and now they graft it onto exactly what's happening with their own experience. That then becomes the basis for the next step, and arguably most important part of the program. I'd say they're all important, but most actionable, which is the actual retraining techniques.
Okay.
So this is where we really get into practicing and conditioning in a new response in the brain and body. I mentioned before that there are these two sides of the equation. There are inputs, or what's coming at us through the senses, from the internal and external environment. And then there's outputs, which is the body's chemistry and reaction and response. And in the middle, there's interpretation. There's the brain. And famed neurologist Viktor Frankl famously said, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space is our freedom to choose our new response. So much of this practice or much of this process is about intentionally getting in and widening the gap between stimulus and response, because normally it's happening under the radar. It's happening unconsciously. Something happens, you eat a food, you have this reaction, or you experience, a sensation, and the body goes into what's known as the flinch response, or threat reflex gets active. So muscle tension, or however it exhibits for you, it's a little bit, can be different for each person, but it's like these reactions are kind of lined up like dominoes. And only when we start to shine the light of awareness on them can we actually put a little space between those dominoes and stop the cascade from happening.
That's a good visual.
But the idea is to reprocess or teach the brain ultimately to reinterpret symptoms, thoughts, feelings, sensations as non-threatening, as benign. And it all boils down to protective response that ultimately, and this is where kind of compassion comes into play, that all throughout this process, we're always bringing it back to compassion and encouraging people to be patient, be compassionate with yourself, and realize that your brain hasn't turned on you. It actually thinks it's doing the right thing by initiating that flinch response, which whether results in muscle tension or outpouring of inflammation or whatever it might be for you, it's coming in a way from a good place. It's trying to protect you, and it thinks it's doing the right thing. It's just operating according to old or obsolete information. And we now simply have to update its education.
It's like we need a big software update.
We need a software update.
Yeah. All my apps are completely wigging out on me over here.
It's exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
The apps are wigging out. And we're like, hey, you know what?
Apps are wigging out. You can use that. You can use that if you'd like to. I won't take credit for it. So how do you guys know how to retrain my brain?
So actually, here's the beauty of it, is that you are doing the brain retraining. So we show you the steps, kind of like, I feel like Morpheus and Neo here. We show you the door, you walk through it.
We can lead the horse to the water, but we can't make you drink, right?
Exactly.
So is it based on is it something similar to if I answer A to this question instead of B to this question, it leads me down this path? Is it similar to that, so that when we get to the certain place, now you guys know which modules, if you will, are the ones that we're supposed to be using to retrain our brain? Or am I completely off base on that? I'm trying to make it as simple as I can for listeners too, and for myself.
In a way you're on. So in the first, 2 sections, it starts off, everyone's learning the same information that's generally applicable. Then in the middle of the second section, now it's kind of like choose your own adventure, right? Depending on what is most important for you, whether it's chronic pain or brain fog or ongoing infection, or it's called the post-viral fatigue, or what we're seeing with long COVID. So depending on your unique experience and symptomology, you will go down the road of applying this theory in the direction that works for you. Then you'll get into mapping out these kind of what we call old and new loops. And then in the third section, you actually start to do this brain retraining, which is essentially a 5-step protocol. It's a 5-step process, just like an exercise that you practice again and again and again with repetition, to teach your brain a different response to whatever is uniquely triggering you. And sometimes those triggers can be the experience of pain. Sometimes they can be difficult emotions. Sometimes they can be foods. We have a lot of people with food sensitivities or chemical sensitivities. So whatever these cues or these triggers are, we can basically, through practice and repetition, train the brain to respond to them in a different way.
How long does the process take typically? Obviously, everybody is different, but if I'm me, which I am all day and it's exhausting some days. If I'm me and I'm the person that once I'm in, I jump in and I go for it, right? So if you're talking to a go-getter like myself, I get started on this program. And how long are you seeing, generally speaking, people getting results? And do they have to continue to do training ongoing? Do they keep practicing? Do they graduate to another level? Is this lifelong? Can you kind of speak to that a little bit? I know I threw a lot at you there. So
no, it's a great question. So I'll address the last part first, because I love to go out of order.
Hey, join the club.
So I like to think of it kind of like, a good explanation would be in a way like physical therapy. If anyone's ever gone to PT for a sprained ankle, you do a series of exercises, and normally you start off with like little, foot or ankle rotations, and then maybe adding some resistance, and then you get back into walking and eventually running. Now, once you've reached that point where you're running and jumping, you don't go back. You don't keep going to physical therapy. Why? Because you have restored an innate function. You've restored a baseline capacity that your foot should have and does have. So similarly here, what we're doing with brain retraining is we are restoring what I believe to be, and what many neuroscientists now know to be, an innate capacity of the brain to balance the body or to regulate all of the bodily systems. When that innate capacity is restored, I want this program to be, I like you're into marketing. So I really like I think it was the tagline for Hinge or Tinder, one of these dating apps. Is like the dating app that's meant to be deleted.
Oh,
right?
yeah. I don't remember which one it is either, but I haven't been on dating apps, so I don't know. But I know the commercials for them or what have you. Yeah. Which is smart, because I don't want to be on a dating app for the rest of my life, damn it. Nobody wants that. Mm-hmm. Or maybe some people do, but...
Entertaining, sure.
I mean, sure.
Where you want to go, I don't know.
Not so much.
Yeah, and we don't want to be in physical therapy for our entire lives. So similarly, we do not. Here, the exercises in this program are very much meant to be, in a sense, like a springboard to their own transcendence.
Okay.
Meaning they get you back to this place of self-management or self-organization, to the point where you no longer need to think about them. So, to come back to now the first part of your question, which is, okay, that's all well and good. How long does this take, right?
Yeah.
How long is this going to take me? From a day-to-day standpoint, once people get to that third section in the program, which for some people is in a day, it's about 2 or 3 hours into the program. For some people, it's in a week or two, depending on anyone's schedule. At that point, they'll start practicing these brain training exercises, this sequence, this 5-step protocol. We can get into a little bit more about how that works. But they'll practice it for about 30 minutes a day is the recommendation. And that's something that people can work their way up to. You can start off with even just like 1 or 2 5-minute sessions per day and work your way up to 3 10-minute sessions per day. But 30 minutes a day has shown to be kind of give that optimal training effect where the brain starts to really adapt and change. And in terms of how long does that need to go on for, 3 to 6 months would be a good time frame to really expect to dedicate to brain retraining if you want to really see significant results. And again, I'll just reiterate, because I think it's so important, that the end game is to reestablish your own innate function. We can certainly make positive changes in a few minutes by doing something like 10 deep breaths. You might feel less anxious if you slow your heart rate down through changing your breath rate.
Right.
But what I'm even more interested in than making an immediate shift is conditioning that change into the nervous system such that it becomes your new default state, so that other things don't pull you off track throughout the day.
But I like that it really is it's the process and the journey to get to our destination. Because for me, my destination is, and I told my sweetie this the other night, I'm like, I am going to heal my body, and I don't care. Like I know that I'm going to, and it's something that I've never felt up until very recently, that I was going to be able to do this. And because I'm getting the hell out of this chair, man. Forget it. I want to go skiing again. Something that I've been missing out on for a bunch of years. So, I'm sorry, tissues come out. I'm just tired, I'm tired.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sorry, I didn't expect to get emotional there with you. For those who know me, know that it was probably coming. And there's one of the episodes was with somebody, her name's Brooke Bralove, and she talks about how hope is really scary. And because you're used to not being hopeful. And then when you get it, you're like, well, shit, I actually could be doing these things that I've been talking about wanting to do. That's really, it's really a powerful thing to think about when you think how scary hope can be, because you've spent all this money, you've spent all this time, you've been through all these tests, all the MRIs, all the spinal taps, all this stuff, the things that you talk about in your TED Talk, things that all my friends and myself, we've all gone through, have led us to zero results, if anything, backwards. And I'm thrilled about finding you. And honestly, I don't even remember how I found you. I don't. You just landed somewhere in my lap, and I was like, I've got to find. I got to talk to this guy. And now I want to be your best friend. So with the program, okay, so we're talking about essentially 30 minutes a day for about 3 months to a year, depending upon how we progress and how well we do, how deep in ourselves we are, how open we are, because I like that. You're the conductor. We're the ones that are doing the work. You're just providing us with these tools to help us do that. And, we're so used to shaking the jar, unscrewing it and popping something. And that's our work, right? And we're going to let the pill do something. And I think it's a little scary for some people to go, oh man, I have to retrain my brain. What am I going to lose? And I know that sounds like a strange question, but there's a lot of people in the pain community that are their disease. There are their symptoms. They have turned into that. Like I say, I have CRPS. I am not CRPS. And I think there are people that would be like, well, if I'm retraining my brain, is it going to get rid of some of the really good things about my personality? Or are there going to be things that I'm going to lose from that? Can you address that question? I'm just curious. It just popped into my head. So I'm not afraid. Oh, yeah. I'm not afraid, but I'm ready. As soon as we hang up, I'm joining. I wanted to join before the call, quite frankly. But can you talk to that about, hope obviously being scary, but about potentially or not potentially losing something through this process, which I can't imagine that you would.
Oh, sure. No, I think they all work together, and everything you said is, man, it speaks so closely, so much to my own experience of when I was going through that condition and the years after and everything. And hope requires a lot of courage. It's one of those courageous things you can do. And it requires a tremendous amount of courage, because we may have been hopeful so many times in the past for things that didn't work out.
Of course.
And it is the most vulnerable state you can put yourself in. It's also one of the most important, because I think without hope, it can be challenging to find that reason to just take steps, right? To put one foot in front of the other. And to your question, what might we lose? I think for me, the question that gets us going in the right direction is not what do I stand to lose, but what do I stand to gain?
Yeah.
And for me, the answer is absolute freedom, is bliss, is this feeling of lightness and excitement. When we were children, we'd wake up like a kid on Christmas or something and be like, what's going to happen today? I don't know. With a sense of excitement.
Yeah.
What's going to happen? And somewhere along the line, as adults and trauma and pain and illness and all of these things, we wake up and we say,
oh God, it's Tuesday.
Again?
It's not Friday. Yeah.
Again, I have to deal with this. So I think that's what we stand to lose, is that repetition, compulsion. And what we stand to gain or regain is that renewed sense of enthusiasm and just sort of awe of being in this adventure of life.
Well, I am incredibly grateful for having met you, even though it's virtual, and finding you. I'm a spiritual person, not a religious person, but I am praying with all that I've got that I'm going to be somebody that you can toot your horn for having success with your program. And I'm not joking when I say that, because I've looked into freaking everything. I do my research, and I've not fallen upon anything quite as beautiful as this thus far. And so for someone like me who doesn't pop pills and won't, and believes in this type of healing, it's the perfect match for someone like me. And I just wanted to thank you for that. And you've been healed now for 10 years?
Yep, 10 years.
100%. Just boop, you're perfect. Unbelievable.
I like to say beyond perfect.
You're beyond perfect. I love to pat yourself on the back there, buddy.
Oh, sure.
I am beyond perfect.
Let me revise that statement. Nobody's perfect. We'll say beyond baseline.
The
beyond
Lord Jesus Christ, ladies and gentlemen.
He is healed.
Yeah. He is healed. Yeah, exactly. Well, we don't want to go that direction. But that's incredible. 10 years. And I mean, you're still on a journey, obviously, but you took what ailed you and what, your journey, and you've put it out into the world. And I thank you for that, because I love that you're helping people and that you're going to help me. I mean, I can feel it in my bones. Do you have anything else that you'd like to shout out to our listeners before we take a hike here?
Well, first of all, Lyndsay, thank you so much for this great conversation and for having me on. And I'm excited to have you join the Reorigin program.
Yeah.
And the last takeaway, I did, hear you talk a little bit about in the previous episode, this struggle that I think is so common for so many people, of feelings of isolation, and this battle that you mentioned as an introvert. I'm also an introvert, and of loneliness versus isolation, or being alone versus being lonely.
Right.
Where there are times when I'm alone where I feel the most connected, and there are times when I'm, where you can be alone and feel completely isolated. And so I just want to say, as someone who's been there myself, that I really know what it's like, what people are going through, and that you're not alone. And, there are people there just waiting to connect with you in a positive way. And that I truly believe, through everything that I've learned, my own experience, and now seeing thousands of other people, experience transformations of all different kinds, that stuck as we sometimes feel, nothing is actually static. Everything is changing. And I believe wholeheartedly that you can be the director into which that change proceeds. So just want to leave people with that measure of hope.
Well, I love that. Thank you so much. I will put in show notes and in social when this episode hits the airwaves. I'll put all of the information you could possibly imagine in relation to Ben and the program Reorigin. So thanks for being here, Ben. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Lyndsay.
You are exclusively invited to share this VIP pain, brain healing, and life surfing journey together. Let's get to the heart of how to heal with you by my side. Please follow the Pain Game podcast wherever you digest your podcast content. We'll be there. Visit us at thepaingamepodcast.com and follow us on all the socials. Thanks for listening, my little VIPs. Catch you on the other side.